All right, I'm going to call the Community Center Exploration Committee to order for Monday, May 1st, 2023 at 7:35 p.m. I do expect Tim this evening. However, Bill had a conflict that he wasn't going to be able to make tonight or any night this week. And I did discuss with him that we were going to be proceeding and knew that we had Pam confirmed. So he was okay with that. Purely administrative item, but it actually is somewhat important. As Janet and I wrote the letter and started to finalize it, our name has been used interchangeably as Community Center Exploratory and Community Center Exploration Committee. And it actually goes back to, I want to call it a defect in the original charge. The heading had exploratory, but the charge in actual writing said exploration. So we've made the executive decision to call it exploration. It's been corrected in all spots, but just in case anyone has any questions or comments around that, it went as far as having to actually rename some of the recordings of the meeting, but Mark Purple was very helpful in that, just trying to streamline that aspect of things. So thanks to Mark, and just wanted to clear up any confusion that may exist. Hopefully everyone's okay with the choice. So with that, we'll go to meeting minutes from March 29th, 2023. I have a typo on my agenda, but I think everyone knows what I meant. Are there any comments for Jen other than the record-setting pace in which she distributed them to the committee after the meeting?
I had one very small thing. It was line 30. I didn't look to see if the lines changed in the new one you sent out, but it was just mentioning if fifth grade would go to Trottier, not sixth grade going into Trottier.
Yep. I'll make that change. Yep.
Okay, thank you. That was it. Otherwise, it looked great. Thank you very much. And thank you, Nikki, for agreeing to do today's.
You're welcome.
And Jen, unfortunately, I had two that I probably could have just sent to you for completeness in advance, but line which starts with line 19.
Yep.
I was just going to say, I think it's better phrased if we say that the MSBA will be taking up the Neary building project in April, and with those scenarios.
That the MSBA.
Yeah.
Committee?
Massachusetts School Building Authority. So it's the state.
MSBAC will be, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, we'll be taking up
the Neary project in April.
Okay.
With the following three scenarios.
That works. I got that.
So you had that. And then my second one was down on line 45.
Okay.
It's 125 square feet per student. There's no dollar.
Oh, gotcha. I have $1 there. Yeah. Okay. I'll fix that.
Okay. And that's all I had on those.
Gotcha. All right. And then I had one that that Tim had sent over, and I got his in there. So we should be good then. Okay.
Okay. All right. Is there any other feedback on that? Okay. Then I will move that we accept the minutes with the edits discussed during this evening's meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All right. Seconded by Tim. Any further discussion? All right. Roll call vote. Tim?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. So that's 6-0. Next action item is chair and members update. So on the Neary Building Committee, the project was officially voted by the Mass School Building Authority into the feasibility phase last Wednesday. I think the superintendent termed it very well. It was very anticlimactic, which is probably a good thing. It was all of about 15 minutes of a public board meeting with the state, and we're moving forward. We had a kickoff call that afternoon, so the pace is really picking up. You will see, I believe, by the end of the summer that we'll have a hired owner's project manager, and then shortly thereafter, a designer, otherwise known as architect, depending on how you want to use the words. There's a very rigid yet public process that we go through to select those two. So that committee will have some work ahead of it, and has a changing composition as well, due to the fact that some of the current seats are held by elected officials that will not be seeking re-election, both on the select board and school committee. So we also have some at-large seats that will be opening up, that we are running a public advertisement to recruit specifically people with engineering, architectural, or construction experience, because that obviously is a very much needed skill set in the next round, but also is one that I don't think we are fully covered on. So if you do know members of the community, the select board are seeking applications, and that went out both in the superintendent's notice, but also on the town website. Any questions on NERI? All right. Janet, your notice is out. Thank you for getting that out. Did you want to discuss where it went and any next steps there?
I went back over my notes after the last round of our emails, and I'm not sure, did it get out to the schools directly? It did, okay. And otherwise, I think we're covered. It went out to all the town departments. Who else did I get it out to?
It already appeared in the blog, right?
Right, it's on the blog. Oh, and she was very responsive. She did a great job with that.
Yeah.
And added other information that I thought was helpful. And also, she's the one that identified the fact that the YouTube videos had varying names so that people couldn't search and find them. So that was good. I think that's it. One of the points we wanted to make for all of us is, if we do get we're soliciting feedback from community members. If we do get feedback, we shouldn't just answer the questions ourselves and move along. We should bring that back to the committee, because I think we should all be aware of what kinds of things are coming up and what kinds of things are of concern. And if we don't, maybe we should have it be an agenda item each time, just to see if people have heard anything. So
yeah, and my guess is you're going to get less written feedback at this point,
right,
and more passing conversations in the community as updates start to come. At least that's what I've experienced. It was actually more on the NERI topic than the community center at this point, but I hadn't heard anything on NERI for a year, and then obviously you start doing notices, right? And magically, people that have never cared about something care about it, which is good. We want to hear from those people.
Right.
So just a suggested process, if someone does get an email about it, what I'd ask you to do is, we have two ways of doing it. One, you can just forward it to the whole committee, as long as no one replies to it. Just that way everyone has it as an FYI. The other is you can forward it just to me, and every time I post a meeting agenda, we can put a packet together with any correspondence we receive. Again, I'm expecting it's going to be very light. I'm indifferent on which way we do it, as long as people aren't replying or offering commentary or thoughts over email. Anything else on public feedback? Maybe just teeing up for Pam, Ryan, and Tim. You're welcome to do whatever you think is appropriate with your relative communication lists, and put it into whatever you think is appropriate format for, obviously, your stakeholders, realizing that there's probably significant overlap at some point.
Actually, I
what-
wanted to,
Oh,
sorry,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead, Jen.
Just a quick follow-up question, just to give us, I guess, a little bit of guidance is there a particular, should we really be sending that out now? Because the letter went out to everybody at large, would it be good to see if we get any feedback from that initial round, and then maybe hit our people a little bit later? just because we're waiting to try to get feedback for a while, right? For a little bit. So I also say this, Jason, only because this is a very busy time for library programming right now. So it's just if we can push communication out a little bit later, that would help us feature it a little bit more. Does that make sense? So I don't want that to influence what Pam and Tim are doing, but I think I said it there.
I think it's good to see what comes back initially and then maybe bring that forward. It just maybe a little less complicated that way when we have more information maybe, and then present it to our boards that way.
Okay. Again, you're experts in knowing your stakeholders, so I think you're obviously active participants in our meeting. You let us know if you need more information, as obviously we get more to disseminate, but I think we just need to create awareness now. Is just that this is going on.
Oh, I'm
Uh,
sorry. Was this bringing the stuff back to our respective boards, or was this in doing public communication?
It's more, I
that
was
included in the
I was
letter?
thinking newsletters. I was thinking like any of your
Oh.
newsletters you send out, you pick the right time, especially maybe if you have a lighter newsletter, right? If you're just inserting something, I wouldn't make a special purpose email about it or anything like that.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
has to be done in conjunction with my board, for sure.
Yeah, I know Pam does stuff like pretty far in advance, right? And that they also have the physical mailing component, right? We do a weekly thing. So it's just a matter of finding the right week, Jason. It just probably wouldn't be for a couple weeks, just to manage expectations for us.
I think that's totally fine. We're not looking to make a decision this month. So, and it's totally fine. I think just put it on your radar screen. And obviously I realize there's a print versus an electronic mailing and a frequency. Okay.
I also wanted to double check. I thought that Martineau sent out the letter, but he sent out something about the Neary building community, referenced our committee, and then said that there would be a follow-up communication. I'm not sure I'm seeing that follow-up communication.
It's not. So Greg sent out
Okay.
right before spring break, or
Yeah.
April vacation, whatever you want to call it. He sent out 2 days before, which was strategic to get people before they left. That was just on the Neary project. Then
Right.
he last week sought volunteers for the Neary building committee. That was last Friday. Now what we're going to do is, now that we're kicking off Neary and we need more volunteers, we're going to then tie in the community center at the appropriate time. There obviously is a little bit of just information overload now, with obviously just coming out of town meeting. Northborough had their town meeting, which had the Algonquin complex. So it's on the radar, but that has not
Okay.
gone out to that. All right, we good on public feedback for now? All right. Feedback from the Finn school tour. So we all had an opportunity to view Finn, but we had no opportunity to discuss it because it was not a public meeting. So what I thought I would do is kind of flip our order tonight. Last time I did this, I started with our designated stakeholders, like for recreation, library, and COA. I maybe figure I'd start with the at-large members, just seeing if they had any comments, questions, reactions to it. Obviously realizing it's one of many possible scenarios. We're not making any decisions at this point, but really just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions, share feedback, because I think it then leads into some of our forthcoming agenda topics and where do we go? So I don't know. I'll start with the at-large members. Susan, Nikki, Tim, if you have any thoughts or commentary that you want to offer.
I have a quick question I saw Ryan just went off camera, but when I was at the select board meeting the other night, Ryan, and you were talking about the deed about whether or not the library site had to stay a library. And I know, I think you and Janet were looking into that. Do we have a positive yet that the library site has to be a library? or are we still not sure? Just because I'm thinking about that and Finn.
Yeah, sorry,
Mm.
turn my camera off. I'm going in the background. I'm going to be eating dinner. So if you guys see the camera off, I'm doing that for everybody's visual benefit. So I believe Jason and Mark were at one point in contact with town council about this. And then they have asked for something in writing, which I don't think that they've yet received. So I know that we kind of ran into the town meeting schedule where a lot of things had to take priority. So this is now coming up a lot. This came up at the last library trustees meeting, came up in our last meeting with this group, and came up at that select board meeting. So what I will tell you what I told the select board, which is my current understanding is that the land that the library was built on needs to be used for the purpose of a library. And that is kind of how I read the deed. I should have a copy of the deed somewhere. It is written like it was written over 100 years ago. So it's in that particular type of language. So I'm happy to share that with everybody. But that's my current understanding until we get something back from town council.
And I'll layer on, I check in with Mark about weekly. And obviously, Mr. Tallerman, as our town council, is dealing with everyone else's town meetings at this point. I don't have any insight into his full workload, but what Mark has promised to try to do is there's a lot of documents. I actually have the deed, Ryan. I think I have it fairly accessible, and I'm happy to forward it to the committee. Jay's team has weighed in. It's just not clear to me, and I'm not an attorney, and I have no intention of pretending to be one. I can't interpret what the answer is, to be completely honest with you. So Mark was going to lay out all the facts again and have Jay give kind of a summary of that, which again, we've talked about for a few months, like Ryan has mentioned. But I think what you're going to find is there's not like one, I think you can probably spin it whichever way you want it to go is basically, so what Mark is trying to do is put the facts down, and we're going to go by the facts. And obviously if there's ambiguity, let town council tell us, because I think that then gives us their answer. Any ambiguity is not going to be, you're not going to just say no, right? You're going to say it's a library and off we go.
I think the one thing we kind of noted too was whether or not there's wiggle room in the deed. You know, Marguerite expressed the idea that it was the intention to have the land as the library. So that's a consideration for, I know, the Board of Trustees. And, you know, again, from an operational standpoint, we also need to have a building where water is not an issue. So there's kind of two flip sides of that, right? Is that, yeah, we want the land to be what it was intended for, but we also need to make sure there's a functional space for the community.
So I know that's not a perfect answer to your question, Susan, but is that enough of an update for now on that?
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Do you, Tim, or Nikki have any comments about Finn as well?
I thought, putting aside the library, I thought it just has a lot of potential for for a community center. It's got a lot of space. It has a lot of parking. It has a lot of space. And I think definitely impressed by the layout that could be configured, I think, to separate various groups and also to accommodate various groups at the same time.
Okay. Tim, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so walking through that building, there's CRT TVs hanging up on the ceilings. There's a lot of old lighting. There's a lot of old stuff. I don't know if it would be or not, and Jason, you would know the answer to this, but I have a feeling that once Neary, the dust settles, there's a not too distant future where Finn would probably come towards a table for a future investment of upgrading that building extensively again. I don't know about the mechanical side of that building, but from what I could see, it was ripe for a upgrade of some kind in a not too distant future. So between Neary and that building was way more obvious in my mind as a place to continue to look at it.
Sorry, Tim, do you mean between Woodward?
Oh, sorry, yeah, Woodward.
Okay.
Yeah,
just
between
thought-
Woodward and Finn. Finn makes a lot more sense from a core working standpoint of what the building looks like to be something that would need more investment for kids to stay in it. Before Woodward would need an investment of any kind of magnitude to keep kids in it. So I think it made a lot of sense there, and the layout made a lot of sense for the three uses we're talking about as primary uses from a walk through it standpoint, where it wouldn't be exorbitantly expensive to make it work. It seems like the way the building is laid out, the way the classrooms are set up, the way everything's already physically manifested there, it seems like it's a much easier opportunity to reuse it and not spend a ton of tax money on making this into a new use. Plus, it's right beside the fields, which makes more sense.
Okay. Susan, anything to add from an at-large perspective?
Not really. I think I agree with everything they said, Nikki. I think you put it best that there's a lot of potential there. And I can see how you can have the rec and the community. So they could have their own separate pieces, but then they also can fit together really well. But then if you need to keep, the kids' part separate from the rest of it, I think that's all very possible. There's a lot of good parking, a lot of good, I think we were talking about all the exits and entrances that are there, which also serves, I think, really well to have multiple different groups being able to use it. I like that there's the big the cafeteria there where, I mean, we're kind of talking about the senior center and the library and the rec center, but also just a community center in general, like that having a space for random community people to be able to utilize or have things like town events. I think there's a lot of good potential there as well. I'm going to keep using your word, Nikki. A lot of good potential.
All right. Recreation, you want to go next? Jen and Tim, I'll let you collectively go together.
So I wasn't there for that tour that you guys did, but I've spent a lot of time in Finn and behind the scenes in Finn with kids and SOS and stuff like that. So I mean, I agree with what you guys are saying. So that's when we were discussing a couple weeks ago, and this was a potential that was like this. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. From a rec side, I mean, it could be perfect to have kind of like a complex there, basically. And a lot of potential there to expand the offerings and the programming, or potentially to have like the kids' bus there to drop off for programming versus us having to pick them up and drive them all over the place, things like that, that opens the door for a lot of that potential. So, or even to have programming during the day for the rest of the community, versus right now where we can't be in the schools and we have limited options. It just opens up for a lot of things that our mighty rec department could be doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think just the layout alone, what it is already, I think is conducive to benefit us outdoor wise. Field, playground, tennis courts, hardtop, blacktop activity, and then obviously the gymnasium with the cafetorium and the stage, and just the big ticket items alone checks all the boxes. But also I just think the school lends itself where there's a flow of collaboration between the round of it, but at the same time there's plenty of separation for the times that we need to be separated. I'm just thinking summer, things of that nature. So looking between the two options, and obviously like Jen said, it's kind of a no-brainer. I think just that location and how much of recreation's assets already are focused on that land, to then have an indoor space connected to it would be great, preferable. And the program, I mean, the rooms too, the classrooms are enormous. So, and they're relatively updated, especially a handful of them. So, looking past the gym and all that stuff, the potential for the program space alone, because of the size of those rooms, is tremendous, both on a rec side and I think just community use for meetings and public spaces, things like that.
Okay. Pam, I know you're missing your colleague tonight, but just any thoughts?
Yeah, I potential, I think, is the right word. I guess one of my concerns is parking and things like that as far as proximity to the building, depending on, I'd be curious to see what the ideas are as far as that's concerned, and entrances and space and things like that. Because there's a lot of seniors that can't walk from that far parking lot all the way to the entrance, that's a little potential issue there, but I don't know what other options there are for parking. I'd have to see how that went, but the other concern, I guess, people really like the feel of the building we're in with that comfort zone. Obviously, they're two completely different things. So, how much would it cost to at least renovate part of that building to give it like a less of a school type feeling, I guess. Not the whole thing by any means, because the other parts of it are awesome. If you go down the hall, the gym space, the stage, there's a lot of really positive things. I love the fact that we could work with rec on a lot of elaborate stuff during the day. I think there's a lot of potential with that too. It's just a lot of different spaces that we don't have now. So I think potential's the proper word. I just have those are the two things that come to mind when looking to my board and what they're going to be interested in. If we could combine all of those spaces, the parking, and at least part of it with a little more or a little less concrete kind of thing, which I think that can be done. I'm not sure what walls can come down and what could be done, but if you walk into that far entrance, the office space is great. But can we, create some spaces that have a more of a comfortable feeling, kind of a little more like what we have now, I guess. I think those are the two areas that I'm going to get the most pushback.
Okay. I think the look and feel part is easy. Like that would be part of things that you can articulate with your board as we move through the design process. All right, Janet and Ryan, I realize you obviously have a different view given this outstanding question on land and everything like that. And but obviously you were there. You're part of our committee, so welcome. Kind of any thoughts you have from a library perspective.
You want to go first, Janet?
Actually, I have a general question. Can we go over the square footage needs and what Finn has? Do you have that at your fingertips?
Give me a minute. So can you give me a reaction and I'll get you all that. I'll pull it up while we talk.
I just thought, I thought in general, the building would lend itself to, the potential for a lot of great use. I think even some library programs could be there, even if we stayed where we are, because I like, the amount of meeting rooms and, when a lot of the activities that are done at the library, people are crammed in or they're upstairs doing a program at the same time people are trying to access other things. It'd be great to have additional space, even if we kept the library where it is. I think there'd be a use for that. I just thought it was a great building. It's all on one level. There's tons of ways to divide things up, secure different areas. It would be great. I do wonder whether the town would have a problem with there not being any schools on the south side. Because now it's kind of spread around, but that's just,
So
it mattered to us when our kids were little.
I actually
outsider.
can I react to that
Yes.
as a resident?
Yeah.
I would be thrilled if I could have a bus that doesn't take over an hour to get my kid to school and have to stop at 3 different schools before it got to the end.
Well, that's
So I'm not offended if they're only on the north. Again, that's my own personal view, but I think transportation is going to have to be looked at pretty hard, and I think it's really one of the Achilles heels of the entire. I think Nikki and I were somewhat talking about this in the past. Like I think it's been a problem for a long time in Southborough.
Well, getting across Route 9, I mean, for pickups for parents, always going across Route 9 is tough too. But I think the kids going back and forth each day, I think the bus issue does trump that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say as a Southside parent, I second that. I drive them so they don't sit in the bus for an hour every day. So, yep.
I have the answers to your questions. So I'm just gonna go in alphabetical order. My source is actually the MSBA. So they're the record of the Woodward School is 75,000 square feet. The current Mary Finn is 76,000 square feet. And the current Neary School is 67,000 square feet.
Do you have Trotter while you're there?
Yeah, I do. Hang on. It's a different- It's gonna be a much bigger number.
Yep.
130,000. So almost twice the size.
He was ready for you, Janet.
Right. And the projected needs, I mean, that's hard to do. I mean, has Rec ever put together numbers for what they'd ideally like to have in terms of space or? I mean,
Like not that concretely. Like we've got some mock-ups from several years ago about ideas of what we would build, but like, I mean, like we've done the bare minimum of if you sell South Union, like we need storage, we need that, like, and that's kind of where we're at. It's like if you move us, we need to be displaced into something that can handle us interim, but we haven't actually taken up like what would we actually do? How could this grow? So. And I think like, I mean, like Tim, I think a lot of the space outside of like the gymnasiums is more about like, it's like classroom, like workshop space that could be shared, right? It's more
Yeah.
about scheduling it and having access to schedule it than needing it dedicated, That's where we could easily, I think, partner with library or other groups that are having events or need space. Because it's not full-time need, right?
Yeah, and that's a conversation Pam and I have had a couple times, bunch of times, about timing of the day and program need timing of the day, where her busy time would be versus where mine would be, because it really would be on opposite ends of the spectrum at most times. So it'd be just shared space, like Jen said. Yeah.
We, just to give you an idea from the library perspective, and I think Janet and Jason might be more aware of this than other people, but that was a question we kind of directly were asked when we were working with the consultant. And I have kind of an answer only because we looked at library construction. I looked at library construction projects that took place from the year 2000 to 2010. And we looked at how much square footage for libraries that were roughly our size added. And generally they didn't go double, right? The amount of space. So if they were like 10,000, they didn't go up to 20,000. They typically added about a third. So we are 14,000 square feet. We were looking at adding somewhere between like 6,000 and 7,000. And that was mainly looking at a number of different factors of things primarily I want to add, like additional staff space, a local history room. That I kind of have a short list, a bigger teen room. There were like a number of things that I kind of have on a wish list. We would look at revising that number when we do our community feedback piece, which we're going to be putting together pretty soon. So if there's other things people want, we would do that with the caveat, and this kind of leading into a question I have. I feel like Janet and I both had questions for you, Jason, when we're supposed to be giving feedback, but we didn't really have because we weren't discussing Finn when we were there, but one of the components we've gotten feedback on before are obviously meeting rooms, and that's something that we've specifically talked about. So I think I know the answer to this, but there was a lot of discussion early in the committee when we were looking at Woodward on converting that space into being potential meeting rooms for town board and committee meetings. Is that still kind of a factor, do you think, in Finn? Like, is that still something we're looking to integrate?
I think it has to be. It's one of the most requested items, and especially if the senior center is part of any, regardless of what building the senior center goes to. That's if we are vacating Corderville Hall in any way, shape, or form, I think you need to not only replace those meeting rooms, because they are used at night when
Mhm.
the seniors predominantly aren't there. And we need more. I think we all know that. So
With space, would it be a consideration to move facilities into that building too? Just because there's, if, I don't know how many user groups are going to be in there, and they're in Corderville Hall now. And the other, I'm not sure where you put the other groups that are in the basement, but
I mean,
facilities
yeah, I mean,
seems logical.
yeah, I think it's going to depend on which user groups are already in there, right?
Yeah.
And I think you would, right? Because you not only have, I'll call it the permitting departments for the most part that are with you, plus facilities.
Yeah,
You also, I know Sarah Castle has been talking with Tim a lot, and was going to either try to come tonight or come to a future meeting. I mean, obviously, we still talk about South Union, right? So recreation's obviously well represented here, but youth and family would need a home in a future state too. And then you can just naturally see with what the town administration has done over the past couple of years. Like every few years, there's a department that sort of moves around because they find they're working with one more than another. They need a different amount of space. So yeah, I think that would have to be part of it, but we need to know how much space is there, right? Like once each user group gets through at least their true needs and then potentially some wants.
Just to, if I can continue, because I know I talk a lot and I'm going to try to be succinct here, but just on the library feedback for me, we have gotten feedback before that if the library were to ever do like a branch or to do some sort of annex, that people would prefer a library presence on the south side of town. A lot of our staff live on the south side of town. And I think I might have to, just sort of mitigate fights for who would want to staff a space over there, right? So I did kind of like the idea of maybe that library space opening as some type of branch or library annex as part of the community center. That was something I had an idea. I was trying to visualize the whole library working in that space. And I mean, maybe there was a lot of walls would have to, I think, come down in different parts, but I was doing my best to imagine it with everybody there.
Did I just say you were open to a potentially split operation?
Well,
I don't think
That's a real turnaround.
Yeah. So
May 1st, 8:13 p.m. Mark it down.
So no, I think we would look at opening a branch. So it would be not just the entirety of children's services, Jason. I think it would be a mix of a little bit of everything, a smattering, if you will, of the library in another place. So
What's today's date?
Tim already got the time down, so we're good.
Okay.
And then the library board of trustees did discuss this. I had the benefit of
I wasn't at the meeting, so.
having that time. And then I will say, I think a lot of the members who were present at that meeting were adjusting to the idea of Finn being a possibility, which was similar to us. I think in the meeting, we were thinking about it, right? So that kind of threw people because that wasn't on everybody's radar. But they were, I think the general sense was that Finn might be a better fit potentially than Woodward. But there was, I think a couple people kind of said their piece about a standalone facility that seems to be coming up. So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap, between the library functions and some of the others. I mean, clearly we have a ton of seniors who spend a lot of time at the library. We do things with rec. So there's a lot of room for collaboration.
Also, the library is hosting candidates night this week, and we really are doing it at Corderville Hall this year because there's 4 contested races. That's more than any other town election in the 9 years I've been here. So we don't think the library is big enough in order to accommodate everybody. So space is definitely a factor. And I mean, we've even thought about maybe moving some of the larger scale programs when we know they're going to be really big over to Corderville as a potential solution to that space problem. It also has the added benefit of allowing us to do a program and not disrupt people who are trying to use the space at the library as a library, if that makes sense.
Okay. I will try to find a way that our agendas going forward allow us to continue. Like, I think people will just continue to think of things and or hear reaction. So I think that this broad public feedback around potential scenarios is kind of what I'm thinking a permanent agenda item is, which will give us the ability to bring this feedback back without, tripping any sort of open meeting law. So probably the first of many discussions around this, but appreciate the dialogue, and I think we'll stick with Nikki's word of potential and go with that. Okay, somewhat shifting gears is public-private partnership research. So Tim, do I need to bring Sam over for this?
Yeah, hopefully Sam is still presently watching, because it took us a little bit to get here.
All right. I promoted him. We'll see if he accepts. Here he comes.
Yep, thank you.
Hi, Sam. How are you?
Hi, Sam.
Been riveting. I couldn't leave.
So Tim, I know you two have talked and kind of coordinated, so I'll turn it over to you and update us or clarify anything you want to clarify.
Yeah, so I'll give a quick just recap, because I don't want to say words for Sam, but I essentially took this back to Kathy and Sam, had the last meeting played for Sam, and then Sam had reactions to what the reason it's there, and I'll let you take over, Sam, so I don't say anything for you since you're here.
Okay, thanks. I guess I'm the one who has been pushing public-private partnerships generally for a variety of projects. And I also have been using the Wellesley Boston Sports Institute project as an example of how that can work. And for anybody who hasn't heard that one, I'll give you the 1 minute update. Wellesley had some acreage on Route 9 just over the Natick line, or inside the Natick line. And they basically contributed the land. A private group came in and spent $25 million building an athletic complex called the Boston Sports Institute. And it has 2 hockey rinks, a swimming pool, indoor turf field, and a variety of other facilities there, 130,000 square feet, about $25 million. Wellesley has preferential access to a set of those resources. And I heard the conversation at your last meeting, the concern that something like that might impact negatively on the rec department. And that clearly was never any intent in terms of what I was talking about. It was simply an example. And I think the Wellesley Rec Department has thrived since that facility opened as an additional resource for town programs. But my focus has been more on financing. And the issue for me is that with public-private partnership, you can actually get 2 pieces of leverage out of it. One is that if something is built by a private entity that creates value of project assets that are depreciated, private entities can actually use the depreciation from those projects to offset tax bills. And that's what all the big leasing companies do. If they lease airplanes to airlines and so forth and write those off, and they package the tax benefits from the write-offs and sell them to people who have taxable income and need to use that tax write-off. So it's valuable asset there that, again, where the towns don't pay taxes, so we can't use that depreciation. So if we can find a way that others can, that helps offset the cost of those kind of developments. The other thing that's interesting is that private developers can build those kind of projects without having to adhere to the prevailing wage law, which basically boosts project costs depending on who you talk to and the dynamic of the project, anywhere from 10% to 30%. That can be huge impact in terms of the cost of building something. So again, I'm more interested in the concept of financing as opposed to the specific of what you might want to build. But I also thought of an example for a community center kind of thing. And again, it's maybe a little far afield, but my goal is to at least keep people's minds open to the possibility of different structures to help pay for some of these things in ways that are less of a burden on the tax base. And suppose, for example, a private developer came in and wanted to build an over 55 community, a subdivision housing unit like Vickery Hills or the other one over near the airport, former airport.
Philander.
Calander area there. What's the name of that development over there? Anyway,
Silkboro Meadows.
no.
Carriage Hill.
Carriage
Carriage
Hill,
Hill, exactly. That Carriage Hill that's draining onto Calander.
That's exactly why I know it. So
Our favorite example, downstream, upstream from Calander. So somebody came in and wanted to build one of those developments and was going to have, as they usually do, a community center as part of that development. What if the town were to participate in that process and maybe, depending on location, contribute land, for example, or maybe throw a little money on the table, and they built a community center that was, 10 times what they would need in terms of size and function for that development. But the town, again, had preferential access to use that for the town purposes that this group is thinking about here. So again, that is, a conceptual issue that you may be far from reality, but those are the kind of things I think are worth exploring. And that is why I had pushed to have that concept, at least, on the charge for this committee to keep minds open as far as how we might be able to pay for these kind of things. So again, I have no opinion at this point in terms of how you repurpose existing assets, et cetera, et cetera. I'm looking forward to recommendations that this group may have about that. But depending on where you come out with that, if we can leave open the possibility of thinking about more creative financing ways, I think that could have a significant impact on the finances of being able to afford maybe more space than we otherwise might have been able to afford. So that's, I guess, my basic pitch, and no intent to somehow put anybody out of business or impact programs negatively. Simply that example I thought was a great one to leverage town assets in a way that the town could never have afforded in the Wellesley example. So that's my piece. Be happy to answer any other questions you have. Thank you.
Jason, you're muted.
Any questions or reactions for Sam?
Sam, on the Wellesley part, did they go shopping for a group that would be interested in building something, or were they approached?
I think
where
they
would
were
you start?
approached, as a matter of fact. I don't know the
Okay.
full story.
That makes more sense, actually.
That site was the old St. James Church where they had the 12-year sit-in, and they finally folded and they raised the church and the town took it over.
Yeah.
So it's a great site there, right on Route 9. And in fact, the group that did that now actually does those kind of things in a number of other towns around the eastern part of Massachusetts here. So they have at least 3 or 4, I think, other projects like that where they've gone into towns, but their focus has been on athletics. So I haven't been able to find any group that has had a focus of community center kind of things or more, general purpose things. But on the other hand, the concept works from a financial standpoint. So it's a matter of finding the right people to do it. But again, I think it seems to me a first step is to have a recommendation from this committee to say, here's the concept of what we need. Here's what we're looking for conceptually. And then to think about communicating to people, say, is there any interest in finding a way to work together to leverage the money side of it? So.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on that topic?
I usually don't get people who agree with me. Sometimes they argue a lot, but it's a good idea. I don't think it's that good, maybe. Anyway.
Well, I
so
think
happy-
I mean,
Sure,
I think
we're-
it makes
Sure.
sense, right? Like what we're currently looking at is like, well, if a school comes offline, could we use it? But
Sure.
I'm racking my brain thinking like, where is that kind of land that we could try to tack something on like that in the future? But like, I understand that. And I think the one thing I was struggling with previously is trying to wrap my head around, but they're building like these like indoor facilities that they're charging money for. They're making money off of it, right? So why would they come build me a community center that they cannot charge admission for, right? So it's a little bit nuanced how you're positioning it now, which makes sense.
Right.
But
Well, we would contribute things, for example, but there's a piece of land off of Meadow Lane over there, Stony Brook, former golf course, that is pretty interesting. And it's got some constraints to it. It's not perfectly located, certainly. But, you know, we can look around for other parcels potentially, and who knows? But again,
So that piece of land over there, I was like led to believe through conversations is like a non-starter. Like we can't get septic on it, like, which is a non-starter.
yeah, don't know. I mean, maybe not septic, but you could build a wastewater plant on it. You don't have to have, you know, on-site leach fields and all that kind of stuff. There are ways to do that. But anyway, again,
Okay.
hugely premature here, but again, concept is interesting. If you folks come up with a sort of conceptual plan of what you think you need, then that gives us something maybe to look around. Is there other land in town or other entities who are interested in this? And I think it might make sense at some point to talk to the folks who developed the Wellesley thing and say, hey, guys, you do this for a living. Is there any interest in something like we're talking about here? And they may say, absolutely not, but maybe they'll say, hey, that sounds pretty interesting. So again, just to keep the discussion open is my goal here in this one, and see where you wind up in your recommendations.
So what other competitive ideas like this were near Wellesley when this went down? Because we have a lot of seemingly similar locations, like Four Kicks and Marlboro, a lot closer than I'm aware of anything to where Wellesley was. So do you think that we're well positioned in our geographic location that this would be an interest of something of that size?
Again, Tim, I guess I'm interested in sort of refocusing from athletic. I think that's a great example for an athletic facility. But I think at least what I'm thinking about now is for a community center kind of development somehow, as opposed to athletics. So, you know, again, I don't know of one to compare to, but I think that it's worth thinking about at least. So for future discussion, I guess I just wanted to get the idea on the table and make sure that folks sort of understood what I was proposing in terms of concept, and then let's see where you go.
Excuse me, Sam, do you know if there are any over 55 developments in the pipeline that people are talking about putting in Southborough?
I'm not aware of it. There are some 40B kind of things that people are talking about. And that's, again, you know, maybe another possibility. And for example, the Dell EMC property is now on the market, and there are a variety of proposals around that. That's a pretty substantial hunk of property there. And, you know, who knows how that's going to play out. But some fairly heavy hitters are looking at that for a variety of purposes. One is the MBTA communities thing, where we have to have overlay zoning that will allow up to 750 housing units in town generally. And supposedly around the T station, but there's not enough room there, so we can put some in other places, and that's a possibility for the Dell EMC property. So again, I have no idea how that might play out, but that's going to be an interesting conversation with some people who have pretty deep pockets.
Thank you.
There's always Park Central. I hate to raise the
I
prospect.
know. Such a great place to drive to, too.
You can't get out of it traffic wise, but
Right.
Are we good to move on from this topic?
Yep.
okay.
All right,
Thanks very much. Appreciate the chance to interject here. Thank you.
anytime.
I'm going to sign.
I moved you. Figured you wanted. All right. Review a scope and proposal from DRA regarding scenarios. So DRA, as everyone remembers, is the architectural firm that the town hired under what we call designer selection rules, which allows us to continue with them without going back out to rebid for these specific needs. And it was broad. It was basically any town building other than public safety was how we drafted the original scope, and obviously schools. That would be a separate procurement process. So I did reach out to the team that helped us last time, and they had some clarifying questions that they wanted. And I didn't feel like I should be answering any of those by myself. And so they've given me a framework to work with, and then they can come back with a a full quote that we can just call a quick meeting to vote on. I will tell you, we will be using capital planning funding that was approved with free cash in the November 2021 special town meeting. Which when we drafted that language, we agreed to go to also bring it to the select board just to make sure it was in a public setting. So there's a series of steps we'll have to take before we get to proposal. But I want to lay the groundwork on two questions that I did not feel comfortable answering by myself. The first is timing. So they didn't know when we were going to come back to them, right? They didn't stop selling business, and they have a decent pipeline. So they do not believe they would be able to start on our project until very early summer. And they would be able to complete it in the fall. At first, my initial reaction, I'll just give you my reaction and then open it up, was, you got to be kidding me. But then when I actually took a step back and thought about like where we're at, where Neary needs to get to, I've come around. And I've come around for a few reasons. I know this is an incredibly hectic time of the year for everyone. And to try to rush it, jam it in, I don't want to rush anything in this. We all know the magnitude of the decisions this group makes, the Neary group makes, and what ultimately town meeting makes. So I wanted them to be dedicated to Southborough and thinking, I mean, they're obviously gonna have other stuff going on at the same time, but I wanted them to really be focused on Southborough when they did have it in their calendar. And then my only other alternative is we could go back out and rebid this. But by the time you actually run through a public procurement process, you're gonna be right back to that same timeline. And these people already know some of the issues, right? And the timeline's not gonna throw us off. I know we have this June interim deliverable to the select board, and I have an idea of like what that may look like, but we don't really owe a plan to the town until December. And we also know if we need more time to get this right, we'll get more time, right? So I've come full shift. I'm glad I didn't have a meeting the day I got their original note. But I'm okay with it. As long as we put steep parameters around it. I'm thinking September is my definition of the fall, not November or December 20th. Right. So I don't know. That's my initial reaction to timing. So I wanted to make sure everyone's okay on that, because then if you're not, then we need to find another vendor. But you've heard my thoughts on that piece.
I think if we blink, it's going to be the beginning of summer. So it's already May. I think we're there. I mean, unless they're talking about mid-July as beginning of summer, but
I'm more focused on the end date than the start date.
Yeah. I think it's fine.
I guess my question would be like, what do we need to do to get together? Do we need to do anything to prepare for them, or is this just all on them now? And we just kind of a little bit go sit on the back burner waiting for this to come back to us.
I would think we would have a kickoff meeting with them whenever they're ready to start, is how I envision it happening. And I think in particular for those that represent our three main stakeholders here on the committee, they would want, I would almost ask them to have a side conversation, right? Like with Ryan and Janet, is representing the library board as an example, and Pam and Bill would do the same thing, Jen and Tim would do the same thing. Very detailed, like what they're looking for, make sure that their vision, right? Like, has stuff changed in the last year since they've last talked? I know in particular, Ryan has been pretty outspoken about some of the conversations or lack thereof. I also think it allows the Mass Library Board process to, right? You just learn a little more bit about that, a little more probably every month that passes as well. So I think the only meeting we would have between now and whatever that kickoff date is one, to authorize the fees, and two, to prepare like an interim update to the select board, or to decide we don't have much to update and don't really want a special meeting with them in June like our charge says. So that was how I saw it coming together.
So
So is the work that they're doing now, Jason, just to clarify, because just in case the question comes up, but that wasn't covered under the original, because it was covered under the original scope, but not the original cost of what they were doing?
Yeah, so all they were hired to do originally was to do a space needs study for all town departments other than the public safety. So other than police and fire. They delivered that, and they also delivered what I would say was out of scope items that we were never charged for, related to mocking up certain buildings, including Woodward, which was not on the table when we signed the contract. We had not gotten that far in the school process. So anything we do now would be it'd be like what I call an addendum from a procurement perspective, where we would define, and we can define that next, what exactly they would be doing for us and the cost associated with that. But they fulfilled their original contract. But because of the way we procured it, you have a way of doing an addendum without going back out every time you need to do something.
I'm also wondering, because I know we're kind of talking with the superintendent's office and with the school, kind of the schools in general on where they're at in the process too. I mean, is it better to work with DRA and come up with ideas for what could be done? Because we don't for sure know what things are going to look like in the fall, right? As far as closures long term.
So we need to work as if we need to bring what we think the best possible scenario is, call it a possibility until the school committee actually votes on a direction. The school committee should wait until the absolute last minute to vote on it, because what the MSBA is looking for in participating in funding a portion of our school project is, what are you doing with the facilities and what's the level of community support behind them? So they don't have a prescribed path. They're looking for projects that will get done and projects that have the ability to pass not only at town meeting, which would be a 2/3 vote, but any of these are going to require a ballot vote as in addition, which is a 50% majority vote. So that's what their guiding principle is. We have very regular conversations with superintendent, chair of the school committee. They know we're working in parallel path, and I think December is the timeline we need to have a view, in my opinion, of what's the ideal community center. And I think we all know that support wasn't there on Woodward, right? So we need to validate whether the potential that we've talked about here tonight is a reality at Finn, and or whether we're looking at standalone facility for one or more of these use groups.
I think that's a helpful clarification, Jason. Like that just helped me a lot with everything you just said. So I'm sure it helped other people. I'm sorry, Jenna.
That's okay. Are you done? Okay. Is there any chance that there will not be a school freed up? Because that's what we've been focusing on.
Yeah,
That school using current things. One of the parts of our charge was building a whole new building, which is, only something you do if nothing else was available, I guess.
So I will answer your question in a second. There's a possibility. Everything always has a possibility, right? So we haven't shut any doors yet, but here's the scope that they would recommend we do is do a space. The DRA, the architect. So
okay.
I haven't heard anyone too offended by the timing. So I'm going to move on from the timing piece and go into this is what, based on what they've heard and listened to in our recent conversations, they would propose doing a space allocation, including a high-level cost estimate of how Finn could be divided based on the use groups, using the previously completed space needs study with a more detailed dive and refresh with council on aging, recreation, and potentially library based on wherever you're all at in your needs, right? Because we may learn more about the deed between now and then too, right? So I think you and Ryan in your board would tell us where you want to go there. But that's option one that they would include in their scope. So basically, we would end up with diagrams and cost estimates of, recreation could be on this side of the building. Library could occupy this for, I'm gonna use Ryan's annex. I'm very excited about this possibility. And then the senior center could be on the other side. And oh yeah, by the way, you've got 15,000 square feet of other departments, right? That, right, we could then, right, we need to bring into the fold here. But like that would be evolving through the process, right? So they could show, an up for grabs sort of space or whatever they want to call it. We called it utility space in the past, but that's how I could see that part going down. You're talking about basically the same square footage we were talking about last year. Just a different one-story structure. Right. Option two that they've provided. So this is like, all of these would be kind of part and parcel in one thing, is a high level cost and approximate square footage of a new senior center independent of any use. Option three is high level cost and approximate square footage needed for a recreation center independent of any use.
What do you mean by independent of any use? What does that? phrase mean?
Basically, I'll use recreation for a second. Tim, Jen, the Recreation Commission go off, chart their vision for a recreation center, not a community center, a recreation center. What's the cost to go build that on a parcel of land in Southborough? Right, so let's just say it's 20,000, 25, 15, whatever that is, and whatever a recreation center goes for per square foot. But basically it would go away from the community center concept, but it would show you if you do all these three things, but if you do recreation and senior center plus a new school, this is your total cost, right? I get the school number is going to be off to the side. But if you did one plus another, this is your total cost. It would give us all the variables to work with, which then I think helps you to evaluate whether Finn is a good deal.
Are they saying it more because the cost is based on square footage versus what the individual like kind of departmental needs that have to be integrated into a building? Because that probably ups numbers. I know that I'm kind of like learning, like you said, as I go with the MBLC process, and a lot of what the state pays for is more based on sort of square footage, like physical infrastructure. It seems like maybe that's what DRA is proposing. Like this would be kind of the overarching, like high level costs for the structures, but there might be individual needs that end up driving cost factors up. There usually are.
Yeah,
right?
like for example, there's gonna be a gymnasium and anything recreation wants, right? And I think we've heard that from Jen and Tim enough. They know how much approximately a gymnasium goes for and approximately how much square footage you need for 2 courts, 3 courts, whatever it may be. But I'll just do something simple like a staff break room, right? If the staff are only representing one department in a building versus you have 3 departments, obviously it's gonna be a bigger break room because you have more employees. That's the stuff I'll call it. I don't want to call it minutia, but the smaller stuff that then leads to their square footage determinations is how much you're sharing versus how much do you need just to function as an independent facility.
I keep bringing up the local history room at the library too, because that's a visualization I want to happen. I'm trying to manifest that, everyone. But so like an idea would be like, we need square footage that would, but then the actual like construction of a history room, like if you do climate control for the historic materials, that's individual, like if the door needs some sort of security access, like all of those are not the physical, just having the room there, which is a cost they could integrate, but not the add-ons.
Yeah, they would have, they'll use what I've seen in the past, the dispatch center at Public Safety Building is a good example. It's full of servers and computer screens and all that. They had a range of what the cost is to build like a data center, essentially, to house that. They'll use a range, so you win on some, you lose on others. It's just to be indicative of help you make decisions on which direction to go. Those scenarios, other than the Finn scenario, just in respect to Ryan, you and Janet from the library perspective, doesn't envision like the library needs, because I think we're trying to respect the MBLC process, but you tell us whether you need a scenario in there specific to the library, because I'm certainly all ears on that. I don't want to speak for everyone else, but I also don't want you to feel excluded, but I know we're in an interesting phase with your grant process.
So because I know some of you saw the select board meeting and saw that the select board voted to support our letter of intent that went to the state. So just to give you a public update on that process, it was filed, and we are now, we have a letter of intent into the state. We did it by the deadline. So we were confirmed as being ready to move on to the next step when we're ready. So there's a couple public meetings about that. If you guys are library heads and you want to join, they are open to the public. Mark Purple and I have to go. So we've already scheduled a time that we're going to be going to one of those trainings to learn more about this. I think because we're it's a lot of this is going to be driven by the public input we get, Jason, which, I don't want to make this more difficult for your process, but really, I would say starting towards the end of May was when we started wanting to push out information on potentially community surveys. And then we're doing one to start, and then we'd start doing some open forums at the library too. A lot of that is going to be asking people what they want at the library and about the current facility, and then things that they would want to see potentially too. And if the current building is meeting the needs of the community in their view, that's also going to be some questions that we ask. So we find when we do this community input, at least we found the last 2 strategic plans, that people tend to ask for more things when we pose the question. So I would just say, I have a feeling like we're going to get feedback that people want more from the library. That's been my past experience. So that will probably mean that we then in the fall go on to moving on to the next step, which is to do a planning and design project for potentially a renovated building. We still want to keep the door open because we have to look at a secondary site for the community center. And then the other thing we don't know is if I think a natural result of this is going to be that the library needs more space. That was kind of a result of the work that we did previously, right? And that's, I would say, in my estimation as library director, I feel that way. I'm not, Janet can speak for herself, but I think she agrees too. The library probably needs to get bigger. That's what the board, I think, would be comfortable saying at this point too.
Definitely.
We don't know structurally what we can do. We're going to need an architect to look at that. So the other thing is, we may want to add a lot of space on that property, but we also have to look at the water issues. We have to look at where the septic is. So I think that can be mitigated, but we might still be talking about doing like a library branch on the south side of town. And especially if a community center is an option, and that would give us some of the square footage that we would need. I would still say I don't want to be greedy, Jason. I think we're still open to multiple possibilities.
But you're part of my iteration that I read through, you'd really be part of item 1, right? Which is the Finn, right? Discussions. We wouldn't be taking on scope to build a new library.
No, because I think
that's what you need to all go deal with in your own process.
Yes. So to qualify for the state funding, and the state will give us money in order to, that was what the letter of intent kind of stated. We would still have to ask town meeting in the spring for funding, but it wouldn't be as much as if we were doing this cold. The town kicks in up to, I think it's $100,000 to do this. So it's a pretty significant amount of money to put together a design. It's also been suggested long-term that if we get if we get a lot of interest, that we may want to form a library building committee. So just if you guys, have some nights free, think about that long term. But I hope that doesn't disrupt what you're doing. I think your
No, it
idea of
validates kind of what they
Yeah.
put together. I think they were pretty respectful, I guess was my initial opinion of letting you run your process, but also keeping you involved because, right, your grant could fall through, right? We don't want it to, but you're gonna have heavy competition.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get a number of libraries that were able to file the letter of intent. I can tell you they used a grant management software and it did trip me up and I kind of knew what I was doing. So I'm wondering how many people successfully were able to do it last Friday. So that I don't have a total number of that yet because they just sent out messages to everybody today, but we'll see what the pool is for people who are going to do it. And then after the letter of intent, not all of those people are going to apply for construction too. So since this process is new, sometimes people wait until the next cycle, but I know there were at least 30 libraries that were interested and they're only going to take about 10. So that kind of gives you an idea on our chances.
Well, the other part with this is, we have the Westboro Library failure in front of us, is the town may not go for it. With whatever we put together, and even if we get a grant, the grants don't pay for half the library. It's what's the percentage at this point, Ryan? Do you know?
It's like around 47%.
Oh,
I
okay.
think
Then
it
it is
might
almost
be.
half of it.
Yeah, it's almost.
Yeah.
So
But the town may or may not go for that number. So, we need to be kept in part of the process, every step of the way of, whatever we're doing with other buildings.
Okay, go ahead.
Personally, I would like to
Mhm.
remain in the FinScope, if that's okay. with
No, you are based on what I read, so you're good.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tim.
I think it's gonna come out in the wash, but I really want to make sure that from this, we get to see the cost efficiencies of everything in one spot. And I know that'll be in the FinScope, but I want to make sure that, that covers a library completely as a theoretical. Because there is like the flex ability. If everything's in one space, if somebody needs some more space, it's all owned by the town. It's all an opportunity. The gym could be utilized for something. Say the cannon's like at that large. Rex gymnasium space could be a good spot to host something like this, or instead of going to one of the schools. That's all part of what a community center would be, in my opinion. So I just want to make sure that, that there's an ability or a cost advantage to having a number related to all these things in one spot at scale. So I think it's gonna be in the first one, and if you compare it to each individual thing, theoretically each individual thing should be way more expensive. But if we can't get a true cost savings for what being together is, I just want to make sure we can get that from whatever we're asking DRA for in this next round.
So I don't think that's a fair question for DRA. I think that's a question we have to answer as a town.
Yeah.
Because it goes to staffing. It goes, right, you involve John Parent from an energy perspective. I can ask DRA. I just don't think, I think if we agree on a concept, then I think you can run like what the result is there. But I think we also need to acknowledge we're probably adding square footage here. So I want to be careful to think that it may be, I'm not sure what the savings will be because
Yeah.
you're adding incremental
Sorry, I think Tim's saying like the savings of like leveraging one building versus building 4 separate buildings standalone,
Oh,
which
that's
is exactly what you said we get. So, right, we're gonna get that in this plan you're describing.
Yeah, I was
Sort of. Library wouldn't be in a full scale at the moment unless.
But
Ryan-
libraries doing that themselves, so they'll be able to add that on as like input to our committee.
Well, correct. Will that, and I guess my question comes back to, will that be comparative at the time that we get that information, that it's in date with the DRA information we're going to get? Like, will it be timely that we can actually compare it into the rest of what we're doing and it won't feel like a separate idea? because I mean, I don't know how much more it would cost to do it again. I don't know if it doesn't behoove us in any certain way having varying numbers because we get it twice.
Well, I
I just
feel like I got a lot of credit, Tim, for being open to the idea of having the space at Finn. What I will say is it is hard for me from an operational standpoint to see the entirety of the library operation move over to Finn at this point. So I don't think it would be a one-to-one move. Does that make sense? I think we're interested in utilizing space at Finn if that is available. I think we are a department that does need space. We don't know if this grant will be something like Janet said. We have to bear in mind, what if the project does fail? What if there's not an appetite in town to renovate the existing structure and to look at it? I would say from conversations, I've talked a lot with the trustees and with the friends group and with people one-on-one who saw the select board meeting. I will say I've been pleasantly surprised that there's more of an appetite to do this than I thought. And that has kind of galvanized me to get my stuff together and make sure that we had the letter of intent submitted on time. But I won't have the cost estimations at the same time that you're doing this work, because a lot of what is going to drive the ultimate building project is going to be community feedback that we receive during this year and then try to integrate into a larger scale building project.
So I guess where I'm at from a personal perspective is numbers that I would like to see would be a full library move to its own thing. So as long as we can get that in a timely fashion, I would suggest we do it through DRA so we can get those numbers up front and compare it with the rest of the numbers, and we're not waiting for something later. So from a personal standpoint, I'd like to see it at the same time, as long as it doesn't screw up something else having two varying numbers or potentially varying numbers in the future. But from my standpoint, I would love to see the library move completely to another location for cost savings for the taxpayer in town, not supporting two buildings with the library function. So whatever we end up doing here, you know, like that's one of the thoughts that I've had from my own standpoint. I think that if I get this right, option one does that full, or are we talking about a scaled down version at this point?
So I think that's part of the user feedback. That would be part of option one. So
Okay.
Let me try to put a decision tree out there. So you weren't talking about are you talking about operational costs, or are you just talking about hard construction costs?
For me,
Yes.
I'm talking about hard construction costs, because that's kind of what this
Okay.
covers.
Yeah, no, all right, we're on the same page now. Sorry. So I misinterpreted that. So I think part one is I need to continue to put pressure, and Janet and Ryan, you're welcome to help me. We need to land the plane on that library building in the
Yes.
land that right? Because I think it doesn't matter what.
Is it an option to move the library or not?
Right, because to me, that's an important factor regardless of the cost, because even if the cost was free to move to Finn, just to be dramatic, right? And you could just plop it in there tomorrow and Ryan says that's the greatest idea, you still have a building that you have to maintain, because you can't just knock down that building based on prior votes at town meeting. And if it has to be a library and you can't repurpose it, then that changes everything, right? So I think we need to land that plane. But let's just assume we land that plane and there's some flexibility, just to create more ambiguity into this equation. I think what option one in DRA's proposal will do is they'll talk to Ryan, they'll talk to Janet, they'll talk to anyone else they think is appropriate on the library board. I think it's entirely appropriate, and Ryan, don't take offense to this for 2 seconds, to see a cost of what it would take if Finn could fit in the library could fit into the entire Finn building with all the other needs, with recreation, council on aging, youth and family, anyone else that becomes a stakeholder in this. As a subsection of that, they could say, just create an annex with keeping the existing 14,000-ish square foot library. You'd be able to start to peel back the onion and come up with multiple iterations, all within option one, which I think is accomplishing what you're doing, but allowing Ryan and Janet to provide their feedback, but also not closing the door on anything until we see numbers and have more facts to work with. Is that, everyone good with that?
I'm not offended by that at all, Jason. I think that's just
I think
covering
it's a
our,
data point to have. Whether what we do with it is obviously going to be the point of much further debate down the road. I wish it was easier to construct the scenarios, but
Well,
hear-
this, oh, sorry. I was gonna say real quick, just Jason, your comment about youth and family and others like that. That confused the last time we got some work done for this. Is that gonna be like an extra category, or is that gonna be like a core category? Because like we had, like we would, I would like to see it where is it this much extra space based upon the number, and then these departments could fit into there with a retrofit cost of approximately this. Is that how you're thinking, or like is it going to be more thought out than bonus space? Because like I'm stuck on there's 3 core groups, and then there's auxiliaries that would fill in bonus space.
I think we need to, I think we actually discussed this in a prior meeting. I think the consensus was we wanted to make sure that the veterans and youth and family had at least a chance to provide feedback on space use. And I think we need to be cognizant of the fate of South Union. Right, like that's very much
Okay.
a huge question mark. So would I open the umbrella to school administration again, town administration, all that? No, because I think to me, we need to understand what the library is doing, right? If Ryan and Janet and the library board get this grant and the town goes for doing everything on the current parcel, that's a lot of square footage that just all of a sudden freed up at Finn, which then impacts your decision making versus if that's a key component of how they're going to proceed because of X, Y, or Z factor. I mean, that's a huge unknown, right? If you just prioritize the 3 on the screen. The other
Okay.
groups, to be completely honest with you, the space is rounding compared to what we're talking about for each of the groups on the screen too.
That's
You
that's
can
fine.
make it work. Give them options to work on.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it wasn't like last time it was an overwhelming piece of the Woodward plan for how it could be used, and just make sure it's not the overwhelming plan this time.
And
meeting
geography
rooms.
matters, right? Sorry, Ryan. I was just geography mattered in that instance because it was in the center of town. So to go back to some of the south side comments earlier, there's just certain functions you're not going to take out of the center of your town.
Just to piggyback on Tim, the meeting rooms that we've talked about that would be part of the community center, are those kind of this like aux space idea? Like, is that part of a departmental?
It's come out through the discussions, right? So you have a meeting room right now. Pam has a meeting room, for example, right? Pam uses the meeting room for everything but meetings usually during the day, right? She uses it for functions, all that. But that would have to be part of it. So, are there any other scenarios anyone wants them to consider? Because the next part, and I don't want to do this in a public meeting, is we got to negotiate it. I don't want them just, right? I think it is a negotiable contract. There's only a certain amount of funding available, et cetera. So I just want to make sure that we have all the scenarios on this available so they can come back with one proposal. I see the hands up. One proposal with one number, and that's what we would vote on in a future meeting. Go ahead, Tim.
So an idea that's kind of popped in my head as I'm hearing this, and I don't know if it's already on the table or if it needs to be explicitly separated. Ryan kind of mentioned an annex idea earlier and about having meeting spaces. The current library building could remain a library function as an annex location. That would be the secondary piece, but the books would move elsewhere. It's a thought I have in my head. And then you could do your functional things in a larger area. It's in more locally centralized in town. I don't know if that needs to be like a reverse option laid in there, same sort of idea with Pam in the current Corderville Hall area, where that building could be used again for like meeting space or, you know, more larger space. There's other offices in town that would need some space, could maybe go there, like a more private youth and family. Some of those things could maybe function out of a spot like that, with the rest of the facility being utilized as meeting room space. I don't know if that's something we need to run the numbers for specifically, but it is a scenario that has popped into my head as those two buildings would become possibly underutilized space if Finn or a larger building, you know, was opened up for these, you know, larger groups. So I don't know, again, I don't know if we need to make it as a specific scenario, as an option 3 or something else in there.
They already kind of have that data from the first round. Because I forget, like in terms of, they already have the ability to do that depending on what you ask them to put there. But I think we also need to be thinking about potential, like we can't keep, you're not going to add, like Finn would be a new building to, if that was the scenario we ran with. That's a new building to the town's infrastructure, right? Granted, the schools have been maintaining it all along, we've all been paying for it. But you can't possibly keep maintaining additional buildings on top of that. You've just added 70+ square thousand feet to your infrastructure. So you just have to be cognizant of that piece too.
I think the scope, if you move the whole library in the Finn scenario, right, you're talking about moving all of the full departments over to Finn, right? So then if some of the functions were to remain in the existing buildings, potentially, wouldn't the cost of moving all the departments be the highest cost? Question mark? Did what I say just make sense?
You mean so we would keep maintaining all of the buildings we're currently maintaining?
Well, I'm just trying to go off Tim's
Offline.
suggestion of splitting the functions, right? Because if you're still, I mean, we'd be maintaining all the buildings anyway, right? So if we're talking about doing split functions, I would say the highest cost would be moving the departments. I don't know, this is hard because we're dealing with multiple buildings. And then we don't know exactly what functions would be split and where everybody would go. I don't know.
I would think the biggest cost difference with what I just said would be staffing. It'd be a higher staffing cost if you have annexes from one core building. But at the same time, we still have representation in all these places. Like right now, the school budget pays for the schools. We with a larger Neary building, we would pay more for school because we'd have a larger building to maintain. Theoretically, it's more efficient. There's other options there to save money in other places, but more square footage means more cost. At the end of the day, the town's maintaining the same infrastructure it already maintains. If Finn would be on the table like this, I'm only throwing out the secondary scenario here, which would be about these other buildings still being used as bonus space. Like, you know, the library building has library written on the side of it. So that would make sense to maintain it as like function rooms for the library or something like that. But all the books and the main services would move elsewhere. And maybe you do like special nights there where you don't need your books and your checkout system and things like that. It would be a secondary use.
Yeah.
I don't know if we,
Yeah, I mean, can I just, I think if we come up with additional, my just general thought is the more scenarios you throw out there now, before you figure out whether Finn has the potential that we talked about an hour ago, the more confusing in side paths we're going to take. My personal preference is we try to stay narrow and let our work dictate whether we need to expand it. But we've got to have, like, the whole reason capital planning advocated for setting up this committee is if we're going to get everyone the resources that they need in the infrastructure that they need, it's gonna come at the cost of existing infrastructure. Like we're not gonna keep all the existing infrastructure other than the ones we know we have to keep, which has to be a factor, right? The library building has to be a factor because there's preservation on it. Senior center,
Almost.
but yeah, the intent is there from the town meeting vote, right? But South Union in Corderville Hall, there's no, there's certainly historical, right, significance to both buildings in different ways, shapes, and forms, but there's no binding votes that are causing us to have to maintain or keep them. And that's the whole reason this came together, was department needs weren't being met. Our infrastructure was not adequate to meet those needs. How do we try to thread the needle? But I think you got to keep it narrow until we make some decisions.
Well, I also might be difficult to try to analyze the cost factors in the short term. I mean, part of what we're trying to do with the library and with this grant is look at the library population for the town in the next 20 years and do a projection to make sure that a building will fulfill the needs of the community. Right. I think in a sense, we're doing that for all of the departments, right? We're looking at making an investment in the structures now, so that this doesn't cost more later.
Ryan, when will you have an answer on whether this grant is going to happen or not? Well, is there a definitive time frame on that? Like,
yeah, we have to do it. We have to submit our building project by May of next year. So that's like when the grant goes in, but then it's contingent on a town meeting vote that actually doesn't take place until FY27. So there's a lot of stuff that gets done in between.
But you need feasibility funding next year, construction funding in FY27.
Yeah, we need to do planning and design funding needs to get approved for FY24, and then construction costs would go to FY27.
I guess I'm just trying to clarify where to go and what information to give to my board. So if we are looking at cost scenarios of individual user groups having individual facilities versus a collaborative effort, can we get cost for that collaborative effort with and without the library piece in there? And then that way, I'm just saying, let's simplify it at this point. Otherwise I know what's going to happen just talking to my board. They're going to go all over the place.
And I apologize for being the outlier and having
that's just the way
come
it
up at
is.
this time too. Yeah, I'm not apologizing to you specifically, Pam, just to the group in general. I mean, when Janet and I joined this group, we were not anticipating that the grant round would open up. And that was something that we had intended to do this whole time. So I mean, part of our interest in this was we didn't know if it was ever going to be an option for us. And you know, Westboro has been brought up a couple times tonight, but there's been a fair amount of library projects recently, Marlboro, Shrewsbury, Grafton, that are in our surrounding towns that have passed and have had a very successful new library built in those towns. So I think Westboro is fresh on our minds because that happened last year, but there's also a lot of recent examples of libraries utilizing this grant money successfully. So.
All right. Does anyone have anything else they want to add on going back to DRA? All right. So I will go back and try to negotiate based on this discussion, may potentially even send them the video to watch, just to understand where each of you are at. I think it's important for them to hear. I'll let them do whatever they want to do with that. And then call a meeting once I have a firm number, assuming everyone's on, and we'll set a definitive what summer means and what fall means. Is everyone good with that? And I think through that discussion, we've already talked about the interim steps we're going to take while they complete their work, which sounds like somewhat of a summer vacation once we give the select board an update. Any disagreement with any of that summary? All right.
Can I go back to the one quick question? Hopefully this will.
Absolutely.
Is there any possibility that one of the schools will not get freed up?
Always a possibility. I find I find where here's the potential scenarios that I could see where that doesn't happen is I think each of the user groups of each, especially the faculty, right, have firm beliefs of how each building should be used, right? And if what funding MSBA gives us, remember, MSBA could say, we're only going to give you funding to go build a grade 4 and 5 school. Then we as a community have to decide whether we're going to continue the decision that was made 25 years ago to have transitions every 2 years, right? And what the cost is of that. So yeah, I could see us hitting a point where we say, not now. And we don't consolidate, but I would tell you there's significant momentum towards consolidation if you can make it so that you don't impact any one grade negatively. Right. Which is, it's a tall ask, right? Because we all know Finn is designed as an early childhood learning center, right? We talked about the infrastructure there. We all know the deficiencies with Woodward in terms of the grade, lack of ability to expand, but it's a beautiful facility, right? But, is that going to be suitable for KM1? I think is going to be a discussion. And what does MSBA give us? So yeah, I can't discount it, but the philosophy is certainly significant momentum towards that. I'll share one final tidbit because then we can move on to public comment and close. In the MSBA meeting, the schools that were getting moved in with us were much larger than any of our current schools in terms of enrollment, which is a key factor in all of this, right? Based on our last discussion, I found that very interesting, right? I was not hearing anything about two grades, right? That's what you maybe do in where you have neighborhood school concept. We obviously don't have that in Southborough. So for what it's worth, that's who our competition is in this round of, who goes first in terms of getting the funding. All right.
Does that give you confidence or or less confidence knowing that?
I think it's just a fact. I mean, we moved into feasibility. That's a huge step. Moving out of eligibility was not a guarantee. But I think the MSBA has been very clear. They'll go to where the community wants to go, not where they want to go, which I think is important. Every town is different. We all know we have unique attributes to Southborough that people are going to want to bring to the table. Sorry, Jan, I forgot to come back to that because thank you for keeping me honest. We've lost our public, so there's no public comment tonight. Is there any other business anyone wanted to raise?
When's the next meeting?
Once I get a proposal. So once I get the proposal, I'll solicit feedback. Hopefully we can keep it to a quick meeting and just maybe 2 topic agenda minutes from this one. Approve the proposal, and maybe a 3rd topic would be just discussing what, if any, update we want to give to the select board. All right. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Nikki?
Aye.
Jen?
Yep.
Janet?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
And Jason is yes. Thanks everyone for hanging in there.
Thank you.
Guys, good night.
Good night.